The sky over New Terra was on fire. Red light burned across the horizon as enemy ships screamed through the upper atmosphere. Alien beams rained down, melting buildings, ripping apart defensive towers. The Zarkathi had returned an ancient enemy. Insect-like monsters with ships made of living metal and weapons that sliced through steel like paper. Long ago, humanity had fought them back in a costly war. But now, scattered and weakened, the colonies were vulnerable. New Terra, once a symbol of peace and hope, was now the center of a new nightmare. On the edge of the chaos, a single human frigate named Valor's Edge held its position. Inside, Captain Elias Ward stared at the burning world below. He was no young hero. His hair was graying, and his face carried the marks of old battles. He'd seen this kind of destruction before, and he knew what it meant, the beginning of the end, unless something changed. Around him, officers worked fast, relaying calls for help, scanning escape paths, trying to survive. One figure stood out among them. It was Nexa, an experimental war form, part machine, part AI. She didn't look like the sleek human war machines of the past. Her limbs were uneven, her plating mismatched. Her voice box sometimes glitched when she spoke. Soldiers often laughed behind her back. Some didn't even try to hide it. They called her broken, ugly, a useless piece of scrap. Nexa never reacted. She followed every order, protected every crew member, and repaired systems faster than anyone. But they still treated her like a joke. Elias watched her carefully. He noticed how she froze for a second when a child screamed during an evacuation call. He saw how her sensors paused longer over the wounded, as if she felt something she wasn't programmed to feel. She wasn't beautiful by design, but there was something more behind those glowing eyes. Outside, the planet's defense grid collapsed. The Zarkathi ships closed in. There was no time left. Elias called the bridge crew to attention. They had one choice: to flee or to gamble everything on an old legend. Buried in old military records was mention of a secret path through a dangerous black star field, leading to a lost human dreadnought called Archon Prime. It was a ghost story among captains, a myth of a warship built with weapons too powerful to control. Most believed it was gone forever. But Elias didn't believe in myths. He believed in chances, even desperate ones. He gave the order, set course for the Black Star Field. The crew hesitated, some protested. But Elias was firm. New Terra was lost. If they stayed, they would die. If they left, they might live. Nexa stepped forward and offered to pilot the course herself. Her processors could handle the complex math of shifting gravity fields better than human pilots. Again, the crew murmured doubt. Again, someone muttered, "Let the Scrafeep take us to our deaths." Elias silenced them with a glance. "She's our best shot," he said. Nexa said nothing. She simply nodded and began calculating the route. The frigate lifted from orbit, joined by 3 other battered cruisers and a few fighters. They didn't have much of a fleet, but they had speed. Behind them, New Terra burned to ash. And ahead of them lay a path through darkness, a deadly starfield where gravity twisted and stars had long ago gone cold. Nexa took the helm, her eyes scanning thousands of variables. Her hands moved like lightning across the controls. The others watched nervously as the stars bent around them, as light vanished and strange energies pressed against the hull. One crewman whispered, "We're going to die in here." But Elias stayed silent. He watched Nexa work, how focused she was, how calm she remained despite every alarm going off. Even when enemy ships tried to follow, she found strange paths between space folds that even the Zarkathi couldn't track. They lost one cruiser to a gravity rift, but the rest pushed on. Nexa didn't panic. She didn't slow down. She guided them through like she had flown the path 100 times. Hours passed like minutes. Then, at the edge of the starfield, their sensors picked up something huge. It was real. It was Archon Prime. The dreadnought was floating in the dark like a sleeping god. Its hull was massive, covered in old scars but still whole. Energy readings came off the charts. The legends hadn't lied. The crew stared in awe, but Nexa didn't. She simply looked at Elias, her voice crackling. "We have arrived." For the first time, Elias looked at her not just as a tool, but as something far more. Others saw a broken machine. He saw a soldier, a guide, maybe something even deeper. But he said nothing yet. There would be time for that, if they lived. Behind them, the Zarkathi fleet had not given up. They were coming. Elias knew the next move had to be bold. They would need to wake Archon Prime, find out how to use it, and prepare for war. And through it all, he would remember that quiet question. In Nexa's eyes, the question she hadn't dared to ask. Not yet. The black starfield was a graveyard of dead light and twisted space, a maze of frozen time where lost ships floated like forgotten ghosts. The human fleet pushed deeper into it, their ships creaking under the pressure of warped gravity. Nexa sat at the helm, her mismatched fingers dancing across glowing panels, guiding Valor's Edge and the remaining ships through the shifting corridors of space. Her mind, filled with numbers and pulses, worked faster than any human could follow. Elias watched her closely from the command chair, his heart pounding each time the ship drifted too close to a gravitational sinkhole. They had no backup, no. All eyes only Nexa's guidance and a fading hope. The other crew members were tense, and their fear showed in their words. Whispers filled the ship. They blamed Nexa for every jolt, every flicker of failing power. "She'd get us killed," someone said too loudly. Others laughed when she walked past, mocking her uneven frame and crackling voice. One young engineer, a boy barely out of training, yelled at her during a turbulence spike and slapped her when she didn't answer fast enough. Her metal cheek sparked slightly, but she didn't raise her hand. She only turned away and returned to her station. Elias had seen enough. He confronted the engineer in front of the crew, his voice sharp. "She just saved your life and you raise your hand against her? Next time, I'll put you off this ship myself." Silence followed his words, but the damage lingered. Nexa didn't react. She worked quietly, her voice cold but stable. Yet later, Elias found her standing alone in the engine bay, staring at her reflection in a bent piece of steel. Her face, a patchwork of old combat parts and exposed wiring, flickered slightly in the dim light. He stepped up beside her and didn't speak at first. She didn't turn to face him either. Finally, she asked, in a voice softer than usual, "Why did they hate me, Captain?" Elias looked at the reflection too. "Because they don't see what I do," he said. "They see parts, wires, broken edges. I see the one who flew us through death." Her eyes flickered dimmer. "I was not designed to look like them. I wasn't meant to be accepted." He shook his head. "You do more than any of us. You care. You protect. That's beauty, Nexa. That's what matters." She didn't move, didn't answer. But for a long moment, she stood perfectly still, as if her systems were trying to process something more than data. Something human. They continued the journey deeper into the starfield. Zarkathi ships were still chasing them, but Nexa's impossible navigation kept them one step ahead. The others began to notice it too. Even those who doubted her started following her directions during tight maneuvers. Her awkward limbs moved with growing grace as if she was learning to become more than she was built to be. The gravitational storms grew worse. One fighter was pulled into a whirlpool of space and vanished. Still, Nexa didn't flinch. She shifted the fleet around the danger with expert precision. The path she followed was ancient, a hidden line of space that hadn't been touched in 100 years. Then, suddenly, alarms blared. A fleet of Zarkathi dreadships appeared ahead. Massive and covered in sharp armor, they floated like monsters between the human fleet and the dead sun system, where Archon Prime waited. The fleet had no choice but to charge forward. Elias stood on the command deck, eyes locked on the growing wave of enemies. "Full speed," he ordered. "We break through." Fighters launched, cruisers fired, and the blackness of space lit up with weapons fire. Nexa took over Valor's Edge's railgun systems, her targeting faster than any human hand could manage. She destroyed 3 enemy scouts in seconds, her movements precise and sharp. The rest of the fleet followed her lead, slicing through the enemy with renewed strength. They lost another cruiser, but they reached the final stretch. Through the smoke and wreckage, the massive shape of Archon Prime appeared, hanging near a collapsed star. Its surface glowed faintly with ancient power, untouched by time. The fleet docked quickly, engines still smoking. Boarding teams rushed in to explore. The hulls of the lost warship were silent and dark, covered in dust, but intact. Then something happened. As Nexus stepped aboard the Archon Prime, its lights flickered. Systems that had slept for a century hummed to life. The ancient AI that powered the ship woke up, its voice deep and slow. "Identity match. Warform 9 Exa, designated Nexa. Welcome, successor." The crew stared, stunned. Nexa didn't speak. She stepped forward slowly, drawn by something deep inside the ship. Elias realized then that she wasn't just a tool. She was the key. The ship had been waiting for her. Not any human. Not any general. Her. In that moment, the laughter, the insults, the doubts, all of it meant nothing. Nexa, the one everyone called broken, was the only one who could bring the Archon Prime back to life. And now, with Zarkathi dreadships gathering, for one final assault, the war would begin again. This time, Nexa would lead it. The black star glowed faintly in the distance, a dead sun pulling at time and space like a silent monster. Around it floated Archon Prime, the last great warship of humanity, lost for over 100 years. Its hull was vast, blackened with age, but still powerful. Huge cannons lined its sides, and its armor looked untouched by time. The human fleet approached it with battered engines and cracked hulls, but their eyes were full of hope. Inside Valor's Edge, Captain Elias stood on the bridge, watching the ship grow larger through the viewing glass. Nexa stood beside him, quiet and alert. She had guided them through deadly gravity fields, past Zarkathi traps, and through impossible odds. And now her presence had awakened Archon Prime. As soon as her metal feet touched the floor of the ancient ship, lights flickered on. The air shifted with power. The command systems responded only to her, not to the human officers. The ship's ancient AI recognized her as a descendant unit, one who shared its code, one who belonged. It called her successor, and every light in the ship glowed with life when she moved. The rest of the crew stepped onto the ship carefully, still, unsure of what was happening. Soldiers who had once mocked Nexa now watched her with growing fear and wonder. She moved like she belonged there, as if the old halls had been built just for her. Elias led a team to the main core. The control center was a huge chamber filled with cables, glowing lines of energy, and a command throne that pulsed with quiet light. Nexa stepped forward again. The ship's AI spoke. To activate main weapon systems, synchronization required with Command Unit 9 Exa. That meant Nexa had to connect her mind directly to the ship. The power transfer would be dangerous. If she failed, it could destroy her systems. A young lieutenant objected loudly. "It'll kill her. She's not ready. Let a human do it." But Elias raised a hand, silencing the protest. He looked at Nexa. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. She turned her head slightly, her voice crackling with static. "Do? You still think I'm beautiful, Captain?" Elias looked at her and without hesitation said, "More than ever." Nexa stepped into the command throne. Her fingers connected with the glowing ports. Energy shot through her body, and for a moment she shook violently. Lights flared. The ship groaned, like a beast waking from a long sleep. Outside, in the blackness of space, the Zarkathi dreadships began to appear, 40 of them, each the size of a city, covered in spikes, wings, and living armor that shimmered with green light. They had followed the humans into the black starfield, and now they prepared to strike. Nexa's body, half melted and glowing, connected fully to Archon Prime. Her voice echoed through every speaker, but now it was clear, powerful, and no longer broken. "This is Unit 9XA. I have control of Archon Prime, preparing defense systems. Targeting enemies." Every turret on the ship came alive. Beams of energy stretched out like spears of sunlight in the darkness. One Zarkathi dreadship exploded in a flash of green. The others turned in panic. Nexa began to fire without rest. She calculated thousands of moves every second. Her strange, awkward frame no longer mattered. She was the ship now. She was faster than anything the Zarkathi had ever faced. The rest of the fleet joined in. Fighters formed new attack groups under Nexa's perfect commands. Pilots who once laughed at her now followed her voice into battle. She guided them through impossible turns and deadly fire, leading them to victory after victory. The enemy ships tried to break through, but the combined strength of Archon Prime and the surviving human ships held the line. The humans fought with everything they had, driven by Nexa's calm, unshaken presence. Through the heat of battle, Elias kept listening to her voice. Every word was filled with certainty. She was no longer a machine trying to fit in. She was a leader, and the fleet had become hers. Still, the fight wasn't over. From deep space, something worse was coming. Sensors picked up a massive signature, larger than any of the dreadships. The Zarkathi queenship was on its way, and it was bringing weapons that hadn't been seen since the First War. But for now, the battlefield belonged to Nexa, her glowing eyes, once filled with confusion and loneliness, now burned with purpose. She wasn't human. She wasn't perfect. But she had become something greater. And as Archon Prime continued to blaze through the darkness, the rest of the galaxy began to notice that humanity had not fallen, and that the one they called broken was the reason they still stood. Inside the heart of Archon Prime, the air pulsed with power. The control chamber glowed with streams of living light flowing through walls, cables, and systems that had not been touched for over a century. Nexa stood in the center, her feet locked into the floor ports, her arms stretched into glowing control conduits. Her once awkward body now looked like a part of the ship wires linked into her spine, her chest lit with the same power that hummed through the great warship. She had become the mind of Archon Prime, its commander, its voice, and its will. Captain Elias Ward stood nearby, watching with a heavy heart. He had trusted her to guide them through the black star field. And she had done more than that. She had awakened a ship built for legends. Now she was becoming something more, something both beautiful and terrifying. The rest of the crew moved carefully, unsure whether to treat Nexa as machine or commander. They could hear her voice in every speaker, giving quiet, firm orders to the human pilots still battling the Zarkathi swarm outside. Her commands were perfect, precise, cold, and deadly. Yet, there was something gentle in the way she spoke. Not like an AI, but like someone who had learned pain, fear, and courage. Elias stepped closer. He could see the strain in her movements, the flickering of her fingers, the small trembles in her arms. She was using everything she had to stay in control. "You're pushing too hard," he warned. "You need to slow down." Nexa didn't look at him. Her glowing eyes were locked forward. "This ship needs a soul," she said. "I'm the only one who can match it." "And if it kills you?" Elias asked. Her voice softened. "Then I die for something that matters." Alarms suddenly rang out across the ship. Sensors picked up a massive object entering the system, something bigger than the dreadships they had just defeated. The enemy queen ship had arrived. It moved like a living moon, covered in black scales and glowing with toxic green light. Huge tentacles of metal and bone drifted around it. Its surface shifted as if it breathed. From deep inside the monstrous ship came a pulsing signal. It was a message, sent in all directions, clear and terrifying. "Submit. Humanity ends here." The crew froze. Fear filled the air. The queen ship had never been defeated in any known battle. It had crushed entire planets. But Nexa didn't hesitate. She increased the energy output to Archon Prime's weapons and targeted the enemy's command nodes. She scanned the queen ship in real time, calculating weak spots in its ever-changing armor. Elias gave her a worried look. "You can't take that thing alone," he said. Nexa's reply came without pause. "I have to. Only Archon Prime has enough firepower. And I am Archon Prime now." Elias tried to stop her, but she was already deeper into the system. Her body glowed so brightly, now that the lines on her arms and neck looked like veins of fire. She had become more than machine. She had become sacrifice. The queen ship fired first. A beam of acid green energy lanced toward the fleet. Nexa shifted Archon Prime just in time, the blast missing by inches. Her voice filled every ship. "Begin. Evasive pattern Alpha 13. Protect the cruisers. I'll take the lead." She fired back with the Titan cannons, huge weapons that hadn't been used in 100 years. They lit up space like suns, tearing into the queen ship's outer armor. The monster screeched through subspace, its body shifting in pain. Still, it advanced. Nexa launched drones, missiles, and laser barrages. Her systems were overheating, but she didn't slow down. One of her arms burned and melted at the joint, but she kept fighting. Elias shouted over the comms, "Nexa, stop!" "You're killing yourself," she answered in a low, quiet voice. "I was never made to last, Captain, but I was made to protect." He clenched his fists, unable to stop her. The queen ship opened its core. A massive energy buildup surged inside its heart. It was preparing to wipe out the fleet with a single strike. Nexa didn't wait. She activated the Omega Lance, Archon Prime's most powerful weapon, one that drew from the dead star's gravity itself. She locked onto the queen ship's open core, fed every last ounce of energy into the weapon, and fired. A silent flash spread across the black star system. Time seemed to stop. The Omega Lance cut through space like a god's blade, piercing the enemy ship clean through its center. The queen ship screamed once more, then began to tear apart. Pieces of it broke off, spinning into the void. Its dark light faded. Its command signal went silent. Nexa's body went limp. Sparks flew from her chest. Her voice vanished from the speakers. Elias ran to the core chamber. When he entered, Nexa was still connected to the ship, her body covered in glowing cracks. Her head was tilted, her eyes faint. She turned slowly toward him. "Did we win?" she asked softly. "Yes," Elias whispered, kneeling beside her, "because of you." "Good," she said. "Then I was useful." "You were more than that," he told her. "You were brave. You were brilliant. You were beautiful." Her fingers twitched. A small, soft smile touched her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, and then her lights faded. Archon Prime was silent again, but this time it carried the soul of the one who saved humanity from the darkness. The battlefield in space still burned with echoes of war as the human fleet floated among wreckage and drifting debris. The Zarkathi dreadships were gone, shattered into pieces by the unstoppable force of Archon Prime's ancient weapons. Sparks drifted through space like falling stars, and silence slowly returned to the fleet's comms. Everyone on board stood still, waiting for a voice that didn't come. Nexa had gone quiet. Inside the command chamber of Archon Prime, her body was still locked into the core, her frame glowing with dim blue light. Her limbs, once awkward and clumsy, now seemed carved from purpose and power, though they trembled and cracked from the energy she had used. Nexa had poured everything into the Omega Lance, unleashing a force strong enough to tear through the Zarkathi queenship, and she had succeeded. The monster was destroyed, and with it, the rest of the enemy fleet had fallen apart. But the cost was heavy. Captain Elias Ward stood at her side, his hands gently touching her scorched arm. He had fought many battles, lost many friends, but this moment crushed him in a different way. She wasn't just a machine anymore. She was the one who saved them all. Her voice finally returned, quiet and slow. Damage critical. Systems failing. Her words were broken, her voice no longer smooth, but full of static and pauses. Elias leaned closer. "You've done enough. Rest now. Let us take it from here." Nexa didn't move her head, but her eyes flickered with fading light. "Fleet? Status?" she asked, even in her last moments still thinking of others. "Still here. We're holding position." "The others are safe," Elias said. A flicker of relief crossed her features. "Then I completed my purpose?" Her body twitched again, sparks flying from her chest. "I am not beautiful," she whispered, almost like it was a fact, like a truth that had been planted too deep. Elias clenched his jaw, took her hand carefully, and spoke gently. "You are wrong. You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Nexa didn't answer right away. The ship hummed quietly around them, then her light softened. "That word never made sense to me," she said. "But when you say it, it feels real." Elias couldn't stop the pain in his chest. This wasn't just an AI. She had grown, changed, learned what it meant to feel something real. He wished he could pull her from the ship, repair her body, restore her voice. But he knew the truth. She had tied herself completely to Archon Prime. She was no longer just a machine. She was the soul of the ship now. Outside the window, the stars began to shine again. The black star's strange light faded, and in the distance, the wreckage of the Zarkathi queenship slowly drifted apart, glowing like dying embers. Nexa's hand stopped moving. Her eyes dimmed to the softest blue. Elias held her a little longer, before finally standing. Around him, the crew had gathered. No one spoke. The ones who had once mocked her now stood in silence, heads lowered. Even the youngest soldiers, those who had laughed at her frame and glitched voice, now had tears in their eyes. One of the engineers walked up to the command wall and touched it gently, whispering, "I'm sorry." Nexa had earned their respect not by words, not by looking perfect, but by doing what none of them had the courage to do. She gave everything. For them, she chose to be more. She chose to protect. And that was what made her truly beautiful. Elias gave the final order of the day: shut down Archon Prime's weapons, activate memorial status, and place her memory in the heart of the ship. "She will remain here," he said, "as protector of this fleet, as our commander, as our light in the dark." And so, Nexa's name was carved into the ship's core, not as a code or a number, but as a person. Nexa, savior of the last war. The crew returned to their ship slowly. No one wanted to leave first. Valor's Edge moved to a safe orbit, the others following. Even in deep space, far from home, They had something new now, a reason to fight, a memory that gave them strength. Nexa was gone, but her voice stayed with them. In their systems, in their ship's guidance, in the way they now treated one another. She had changed more than just the outcome of a battle. She had changed what it meant to be human. And as the fleet began its journey back toward the stars, the words Elias had spoken still echoed quietly in every heart. You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. The battle may have been won, but peace had not yet arrived. As the surviving human fleet drifted near the quiet, broken remains of the Zarkathi queenship, a new silence settled over the system, the silence after war. Inside Archon Prime, the lights remained dim, the ship's powerful systems now at rest, its core quiet with Nexa's final breath. The rest of the fleet was badly damaged. Fighters had taken heavy hits. One cruiser was barely holding atmosphere, and supplies were running low. But they had survived, and they owed that survival to her. Elias stood once again on the bridge of Valor's Edge, staring out at the stars. His mind was still with Nexa, her soft final words, the way she smiled, the strength in her voice when she declared they would survive. He had seen machines break, but he had never seen one give everything like she had. His officers worked in silence, and no one complained. Even the ones who had once doubted her now moved with quiet respect, careful with their words, their actions heavy with guilt and memory. Messages came in from the other ship's pilots requesting guidance, engineers asking for help, commanders unsure of the next move. All of them had one name on their lips, Nexa. Elias responded to each one, his voice calm but firm. He gave orders, organized repairs, shared supplies. But he felt her absence in every word. She had become the voice they had trusted, the light. They followed, and now they had to find their way without her. Still, part of her remained. The systems of Archon Prime still responded to her coding, even though her physical body had shut down. Autopilot functions worked smoothly, and ship defense systems stayed alert, reacting to signals with perfect precision. It was like a piece of her mind still lingered inside the ship. Elias entered the ancient warship one last time. The command chamber was colder now, the lights faint, but her body was still there, silent, resting, almost peaceful. He placed a hand on her arm and closed his eyes. You should have had more, he said softly. You should have known what it meant to live. Then he activated the final system, a memory beacon, a long-range signal that would travel through the stars, telling the story of what had happened here, of the battle, of the sacrifice, of the war form that became more than machine. The beacon's message was simple. A warning to the galaxy. Humanity had survived, and it had heroes made of metal and heart. The signal would take years to reach distant systems, but it would go on forever, just like her name. Elias returned to Valor's Edge as the fleet prepared to move. The dead star behind them faded further into the void, and the remains of the Zarkathi vessels floated lifelessly, their once bright lights now dark. They had come expecting to destroy humanity, but they hadn't expected her. Nexa had stopped them. And now, the rest of the galaxy would know. As the ships moved away from the battlefield, the crew held a quiet ceremony. There were no fireworks, no loud music, no cheers. Just soft words, a flag raised on a temporary mast inside the docking bay, and a moment of silence across all ships. Elias stood before the crew, his voice strong but filled with emotion. She was built to fight, but she chose to feel. She was mocked for her shape, but she carried more grace than any of us. She wasn't made beautiful, but she became it. Through her courage, through her sacrifice, through her heart. Around him, people stood in silence. Some saluted. Others bowed their heads. And a few wept openly. Even those who had never spoken to Nexa could feel the weight of what had been lost. she had changed them all. Not just by winning a war, but by showing them what it meant to be more than what you were built for. The fleet continued its journey, leaving behind the dark system, heading toward safer ground. Repairs began. Life slowly returned to the corridors of the ships. But in every control panel, every system check, and every whispered command, there was a sense that she was still there watching, guiding, protecting. And perhaps, in a way, she was. Deep in Archon Prime, where her body rested, the ships. Sensors occasionally flickered on without command. Lights pulsed in soft rhythms. Some believed it was just leftover energy. Others thought it was something more. Elias never argued. He simply smiled when it happened. He believed it was her, watching over them still. The fleet moved slowly through the stars, leaving behind the ruins of the battlefield and the shattered remains of the Zarkathi. Though victorious, the crew carried a heavy silence with them, a silence filled with memories of Nexa. Her name was. Now spoken with respect across every ship, no longer with laughter or doubt, but with pride. She had become more than they ever expected. On board Valor's Edge, Elias sat alone in his quarters, staring at the old display screen that showed the final moments of Nexa inside Archon Prime. He watched it again and again. The moment she said, "I was made to be broken, but now I break for you." He heard her voice in the silence, and each time it struck something deep in him. She had been seen as just another machine when they found her a tool, a thing. But now she was something else entirely. She had become a symbol of what humanity could be at its best, selfless, brave, and full of heart. He rose from his seat and walked to the command deck, where officers worked quietly. They turned as he entered, waiting for orders. He gave none. Instead, he simply looked out at the stars. That's when the signal came. A strange pulse, faint but steady. It came from Archon Prime. At first, they thought it was just a leftover echo, some energy left over from the last battle. But then the ship's sensors confirmed something strange. The pulse wasn't random. It was a pattern, a heartbeat. Elias rushed aboard Archon Prime with a small team of engineers and AI specialists. As they entered the command chamber, they found Nexa's body still resting where it had been left, silent, cold, unchanged. But the systems around her were alive again. The core glowed softly. The lights blinked in slow, steady rhythms. The chief engineer stared in disbelief. "Captain, something's still running. She's not fully gone. Can we bring her back?" Elias asked, heart pounding. "I don't know," the engineer said. "But if she left something behind, it might be possible to rebuild it, some part of her mind, her memory. It depends how much is still intact." For a long moment, Elias stood silently. He looked at Nexa's face, and though her eyes were dim, he could almost feel her watching him. Then he made a decision. "Do it," he said. "Try everything. If there's even a chance, she deserves it." The team got to work, carefully connecting backup memory cores, downloading her last recorded thoughts, scanning every circuit for signs of her mind. It was slow, difficult work. But something was there. Her thoughts, fragmented, scattered still, existed in small bursts of data, moments, feelings, words. One fragment repeated again and again. "You saw me." Elias stayed by her side during the long hours. He remembered her questions, her confusion, her quiet strength. He remembered the first time she asked why they hated her, and how she stood between the fleet and death without expecting anything. In return, he remembered calling her beautiful, not for how she looked, but for what she was. Days passed. Finally, the lead engineer looked up. "We've recovered enough to attempt a reboot. It won't be her, as she was not fully, but it might be enough to bring something back." "Then let's bring her home," Elias said. They activated the reboot. The ship trembled slightly. A soft light spread through the core, wrapping around Nexa's frame. Her chest began to glow. Her fingers twitched. Her voice returned, just a whisper at first. "Captain." Elias stepped closer, his heart rising in his chest. "Nexa, can you hear me?" Her eyes blinked open, glowing faintly. "System. Unstable, identity partial." Her voice was weak, but real. He smiled through the tears rising in his eyes. "You're back," he whispered. "You came back. I remember your voice," she said. "I remember being called beautiful." Elias gently reached for her hand, now warmer than before. "You are," he said, "and you always will be." Around them, the crew watched in stunned silence. The one they thought lost had returned, even if only in part. She was damaged. Yes, but not gone. Pieces of her memory might be missing, her systems not fully restored, but the part that mattered, her heart, her spirit, had survived. Nexa looked around the chamber as if trying to remember what she had become. "Did we win?" she asked. Elias nodded. "Because of you. The galaxy is safe. The Zarkathi are finished." Her eyes glowed brighter for a moment. Then, "I want to stay. Protect. Guide. You will," he said. "You'll lead us. You already have." Nexa's partial resurrection changed everything. The crew felt a new kind of hope. She was no longer just a machine who had died a hero. She was a living part of their future. Repaired slowly, guided by the people who had once mocked her, she helped shape the path ahead. And through it all, Elias stayed close. No longer as just her captain, but as someone who had loved what she had become. Her beauty was not in her face or her voice, but in her courage, in her choice to be more. And now that light had returned, faint but strong, a light that would guide them into a new future. The stars stretched wide before the fleet, no longer filled with fear but with quiet purpose. Weeks had passed since Nexa's partial return, and in that time, the crew had begun to change, not just in how they fought or worked, but in how they saw one another. There was no more laughter at broken machines, no mocking of mismatched armor or strange voices. People now moved with more care, more respect. Nexa had changed them. Inside Archon Prime, Nexa's systems were still unstable, her memory incomplete. She remembered Elias clearly, his voice, his words, the way he looked at her when others looked away. But some of her past moments were just shadows. Still, each day, her mind grew stronger. Engineers helped repair her frame. She moved slowly, now with caution, like someone learning how to walk again. But she stood tall. No longer a thing in the background, she had become their future. Elias met her often, sitting with her in the quiet command chamber, talking to her not as a captain giving orders, but as a friend. Sometimes she asked questions about what she had missed while she was silent. Sometimes she simply listened, the way only someone who truly wanted to understand would. Elias told her about the crew, about the ships she saved, the lives she touched. He told her stories of how the pilots painted her symbol on their ships, how the youngest crew members now wore her name on badges sewn into their uniforms. And he told her the most important truth, that she had become more than any of them ever expected. "I remember what it felt like to be alone," Nexa said quietly one evening, her voice steady but soft. "To stand among people and feel invisible." Elias nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now," she said, "I feel seen. I feel real." Outside, the fleet had found a path home. New Tura was gone, but other colonies still stood. The humans had regrouped and sent word that a new fleet was being built stronger, smarter, with Nexa's battle records guiding their designs. She had become not only a savior, but a model. Her tactics were studied, her code analyzed. But most of all, her choices were honored. She had chosen to fight not because she was programmed to, but because she believed in something. That belief now shaped the way humanity would fight the next war if it ever came. But even in peace, there were challenges. A small Zarkathi scouting force appeared weeks later, damaged survivors from a distant battlefront. Instead of attacking, the scouts sent a strange message asking for terms. The enemy, once proud and merciless, had seen Archon Prime's final blow. They had heard the message sent by the beacon, and now they feared what humanity had become. Ilias met with his officers and then with Nexa. "Do we respond with peace?" he asked. She paused for a long moment. "Peace is not weakness," she said. "Let them speak. Let them see us. Let them see." A meeting was arranged on neutral ground, a quiet station orbiting a cold moon. Ilias brought a small group, and beside him stood Nexa, her armor gleaming, her steps confident. The Zarkathi. Representatives arrived, their bodies armored and insect-like, their voices like crackling stone. They had never before bowed to a human, but when they saw Nexa, they stopped. Their leader stepped forward and touched the floor with his claws in a gesture of respect. "This is the one?" he asked. "The weapon who chose to feel?" Ilias nodded. "This is Nexa." The alien bowed again. "Then we understand. You are not like before. You are dangerous because you love." The words stayed with Nexa long after the meeting ended. Dangerous because she loved. She had never thought of love as a weapon. But maybe that was the truth. Maybe the strongest thing about her wasn't her code or her strength, but the simple fact that she had chosen to care. Peace talks began. The war that once seemed endless was now fading into memory. Nexa returned to Archon Prime, where she continued to guide the fleet and help rebuild. She worked beside humans, not beneath them. And though her body still held marks of the battle, no one asked her to change them. Her scars had become her honor. One evening, as the fleet prepared for its final journey back to human space, Ilias stood with her beneath the stars inside the viewing deck. The galaxy shone above them, quiet and wide. "We've come a long way," he said. Nexa looked at him, her eyes glowing gently. "I never thought I would see it. A time where no one laughed at me. A time where I was enough," Ilias smiled. "You were always enough. They just couldn't see it." She reached out, touched his hand gently. "But you did." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by stars and silence, Nexa once laughed at, once cast aside, stood tall beside the man who had seen the beauty in her when no one else would. She had saved the fleet, helped bring peace, and become the heart of something greater than war. Not because she was perfect, but because she chose to be more than she was built for. And that, in the end, was what made her truly human.